Reed Carter didn't ask for complications. Not in his line of work. Not in his life. The job had seemed straightforward. Escort a Viraki princess to a diplomatic summit, collect his fee, and disappear into the vastness of the galaxy, where he could drink away the memories of everything he'd seen, working as a mercenary for the past 8 years. Earth had been happy to export its disillusioned soldiers to the stars once interstellar travel became routine. And Reed had been equally happy to leave behind a planet that felt increasingly like a memory from someone else's life. The Royal Viraki ship, the astral reverence, gleamed with the bioluminescent sheen that characterized their aesthetics, all flowing lines and organic curves, designed to mimic the sacred forests of their homeworld. It made Reed uncomfortable, like he was standing inside a living organism. Give him the utilitarian metal corridors of a standard coalition vessel any day. "The human mercenary has arrived, Your Highness," announced the attendant, a tall, willowy Viraki, with skin that shifted subtly from cobalt to midnight blue as he moved through patches of light. Princess Savara didn't turn immediately. She was studying a three-dimensional tactical display, her posture rigid, shoulders squared. She wasn't what Reed had expected. Most Viraki royalty he'd encountered were draped in ceremonial biofabric that responded to their emotions, a rainbow of living textile that signaled status and lineage. Savara wore a military-grade combat suit, sleek and practical, with only a small royal insignia emblazoned above her heart, a spiraling double helix encased in what looked like stylized flames. When she finally faced him, Reed found himself looking at a warrior, not a pampered royal. Her features were sharp, almost severe, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of molten silver. Her skin had the characteristic blue tint of the Viraki, but hers was paler, marked with faint patterns that resembled circuitry, the sign of a high-born bloodline. "You are shorter than your file suggested," she said, her voice containing that strange harmonic quality all Viraki possessed, like two people speaking in perfect unison. Reed didn't bow. "And you're less decorative than I expected." A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed her face before the impassive mask returned. "The Viraki do not waste resources on ornamentation when faced with threats. Your role is straightforward. Ensure I reach the Galactic Concord Summit alive and intact." "That's what your 12 Royal Guards are for," Reed said, gesturing to the silent, heavily armed Viraki positioned throughout the chamber. "Why bring in an Earthling?" Savara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because you are expendable, human, and because Earthlings have a reputation for improvisation that my guards lack. So I'm the wild card you throw at unexpected problems." "Precisely." She turned back to her display. "We depart in 20 minutes. Familiarize yourself with the ship's emergency protocols and prepare for potential hostilities." Reed knew a dismissal when he heard one. As he turned to leave, Savara spoke again, her voice marginally softer. "And Carter, the threats are legitimate. The peace accord I am negotiating will end 3 centuries of conflict between my house and the Sarathai dynasty. There are factions within both realms who prefer war to peace." Reed looked back over his shoulder. "Just doing my job, Your Highness. I don't get involved in politics." Her silver eyes seemed to pierce through his practiced indifference. "Everyone is involved in politics, human, whether they acknowledge it or not." The attack came 12 hours into their journey. Reed had spent the time studying the ship's schematics, identifying potential security vulnerabilities, and trying to ignore the barely concealed disdain of the Royal Guards. The Viraki were notorious for their sense of superiority, a trait Reed found particularly ironic, given that humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel, while the Viraki were still perfecting ceremonial bloodletting rituals. The first sign of trouble was the slight fluctuation in the ship's artificial gravity. Reed was in the mess hall, forcing down the bland protein paste that passed for food among the Viraki. Something about purifying the body before diplomatic engagements. When he felt the telltale shift. He'd been on enough sabotage ships to recognize the sensation. He was running toward the princess's quarters before the alarm even sounded. The corridor outside Savara's chamber was chaos. 3 royal guards lay dead, their bodies leaking the iridescent blue fluid that served as Viraki blood. The attackers, 6 figures in matte black armor, were engaged with the remaining guards. Their movements were too fluid, too precise for standard mercenaries, professional assassins, then, likely guild-trained. Reed drew his Colt Graviton, an antique by galactic standards, but reliable when energy weapons could be disrupted. The pistol fired hyper-accelerated metal projectiles, devastating against both armor and flesh. He took down 2 assassins with carefully placed shots before they even registered his presence. The third turned toward him, raising a vibroblade that hummed with deadly energy. Reed sidestepped the first swing, feeling the displaced air against his cheek, then drove his elbow into the attacker's throat. As the assassin staggered backward, Reed followed with a shot to the faceplate. When he reached Savara's door, he found it partially melted, molecular acid, most likely. Inside, the princess was holding her own against the final attacker, wielding a ceremonial staff with deadly efficiency. But Reed could see she was favoring her left side, a dark stain spread across her combat suit. Reed lined up his shot, but the assassin moved with unexpected speed, grabbing Savara and using her as a shield. "The princess dies today," the assassin hissed, voice distorted through the helmet's vocoder. "The old ways must be preserved." Savara's eyes met Reed's over the assassin's shoulder. There was no fear there, only calculation. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod, then suddenly went limp in the attacker's grasp. The momentary adjustment was all Reed needed. His shot caught the assassin where the helmet met the neck seal. The impact sent a spray of crimson across the room. Human blood, not Viraki. Interesting. As the body crumpled, Savara staggered, pressing her hand against the wound in her side. Reed moved forward to support her, his arm encircling her waist. "We need to get you to the medical bay," he said. "No," she replied, her voice strained but commanding. "The path to the medical bay is likely compromised. There's an emergency kit in my private quarters." Reed half-carried her through a concealed door at the back of the chamber. The room beyond was surprisingly austere for royalty. A sleeping platform, a meditation area, and a small workstation covered with technical diagrams. Savara directed him to a cabinet where he found medical supplies. As he helped her remove the armor plate covering her wound, her luminescent blood smeared across his hands and forearms. The cut was deep, slicing through the reinforced fabric of her suit. "Pressure," she instructed, her voice steady despite the pain. "The regenerative compounds in my blood will seal the wound quickly, but it needs containment." Reed pressed a sterile compress against the injury, acutely aware of the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers. Those weren't ordinary assassins. "No," she agreed. "Guild-trained, using Serathi tactics. But the last one was human." She paused, studying his face. "Like you." "I noticed," Reed said. "Strange bedfellows." A shout from outside interrupted them. The captain of the Royal Guard, Torvin, burst in, his weapon drawn. He froze at the sight before him, Reed's hands pressed against the princess's bare side, her blood covering his skin. Torvin's eyes widened in shock. "Your Highness, the Blood Covenant. It's been initiated." Savara's expression didn't change, but Reed felt her muscles tense beneath his touch. "What's he talking about?" Reed asked, suddenly aware of an odd tingling sensation where her blood contacted his skin. Torvin dropped to one knee, head bowed. "The sacred blood covenant has been witnessed. The human bears the royal blood upon his flesh. By ancient law, he is now Arkanivesh, the chosen one. Reed looked to Savara for explanation, but her face had become an impenetrable mask. Princess, what the hell is going on? Don't panic, she said quietly, her silver eyes locked on his. Everything is proceeding as it must. The tingling sensation in Reed's skin intensified, spreading up his arms like electric fire. The room began to spin around him, the lights too bright, sounds too sharp. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Savara's face, calm and determined. Not afraid, he realized. Not surprised. She had been expecting this all along. Chapter 2. When the blood echoes Reed awoke in unfamiliar surroundings. The air heavy with the scent of Varaki incense, a mixture of spice and ozone that always reminded him of approaching thunderstorms. He was lying on a medical platform. But this wasn't the ship's utilitarian medical bay. The ceiling arched high above him, covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with something. It took him a moment to realize they were synchronizing with his heartbeat. The integration has begun, said a voice to his right. Reed turned to find an elderly Varaki standing beside the platform. Unlike most of his species, his skin had faded to a pale periwinkle, with the circuit-like markings standing out in stark relief. He wore the simple robes of a Varaki scientist priest, adorned only with a symbol matching the one Reed had seen on Savara's combat suit. "Where am I?" Reed demanded, sitting up. A wave of dizziness hit him, and he gripped the edge of the platform to steady himself. "The sacred chambers of blood memory, within the temple of genetic continuity," the elder replied, as if that explained anything. "I am Mentor Ketvaren, first keeper of royal lineage, and you are causing quite the disruption in our carefully ordered world, human." "Join the club," Reed muttered. "Where's the princess? What happened on the ship?" "Princess Savara is attending to diplomatic matters. The assassination attempt was neutralized, and we have arrived at Enteril. The summit preparations continue." Ketvaren studied him with unsettling intensity. "But you are now at the center of a much more significant event than a mere political gathering." Reed swung his legs over the side of the platform. "Yeah, about that. Someone want to explain what this blood covenant business is?" Before Ketvaren could answer, the chamber doors slid open, and Savara entered. She had changed from her combat suit into formal attire, a flowing garment that seemed to be made of liquid metal, shimmering with each movement. Her wound appeared completely healed, though she still moved with the careful precision of someone managing pain. "Leave us," she commanded Ketvaren. The elder bowed and departed without comment. Savara approached Reed, stopping just beyond arm's reach. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone's playing drums inside my skull." "What did you do to me?" Her expression remained neutral. "I did nothing. The blood covenant is an ancient biological reaction. When royal Varaki blood contacts the skin of a genetically compatible being, it initiates a biochemical bond." "And you didn't think to mention this before I got your blood all over me?" Savara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Would you have preferred I let the assassin kill me?" Reed ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "No, but a little warning would have been nice. Hey, by the way, if my alien blood touches you, we're mystically bonded for life. That kind of thing." "It's not mystical. It's biological," she corrected. "The Varaki evolved as a species with complex genetic recognition systems. In ancient times, it ensured that leadership was passed to individuals with compatible genetic structures who could carry forward our collective memory." "Collective memory?" "You've been experiencing it already. The dreams." Reed hesitated. She was right. His sleep had been filled with vivid images, alien landscapes, faces he'd never seen, ceremonies conducted under twin moons. He had dismissed them as hallucinations from whatever Viraki medicine they'd given him. Those aren't just dreams, Savara continued. They're genetic memories, carried in my bloodline for generations. The blood covenant is transferring them to you. Reed stood, fighting through another wave of dizziness. Well, untransfer them. I didn't sign up for this. It's not reversible. For the first time, a hint of emotion cracked through her composed exterior. Frustration, perhaps, or resignation. The process has begun. According to our laws, you are now Arkanivesh, one chosen by blood to stand as partner to the royal line. Partner, Reed repeated flatly. Define partner. Savara's gaze was unwavering. In your terms, spouse, mate, life bond. The treaty I came to negotiate includes a marriage alliance between my house and the Sarathai dynasty. As Arkanivesh, you have complicated matters considerably. Reed stared at her. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not marrying anyone, especially not an alien princess. I just met. No offense. None taken, she replied coolly. I had no more desire for this outcome than you did. Something about her tone made Reed pause. Did you? Because your guard captain didn't seem all that surprised. And neither did you. Come to think of it. Savara's expression remained unreadable. But Reed had spent years reading people, human and otherwise, and caught the slight tension in her jaw. The blood covenant is rare, she said carefully, but not unprecedented. In times of political instability, it has occurred. Occurred, Reed echoed. Like accidents just happen. Like assassins just happen to attack when I'm around to play hero. Savara's silver eyes flashed. Are you accusing me of orchestrating the attack? People died. Carter. My people. I'm not accusing you of anything, Reed said, taking a step closer to her. I'm asking for the truth. Because right now, I'm bonded to you without my consent, dreaming your ancestors' memories, and apparently disrupting some major political alliance. So, maybe cut the diplomatic evasions and tell me what's really going on. For a long moment, they stood facing each other in silence. Then, Savara exhaled softly, and some of the rigid formality seemed to leave her posture. The situation is complicated, she began. The marriage alliance with Prince Sarkath was arranged when we were children. It would unite our houses and end centuries of conflict. But Sarkath has changed in recent years. He has embraced the most extreme traditional factions, advocating for military expansion and genetic purification. Sounds like a real charmer. Savara's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Indeed, the alliance is still politically necessary, but I had concerns about binding myself to such a partner. So you were looking for a way out, Reed surmised. I was exploring alternatives, she corrected. The blood covenant was a remote possibility. It requires specific genetic markers that are exceedingly rare outside the Viraki royal lines. I had no expectation it would activate with you or anyone else on this mission. Reed wasn't entirely convinced, but before he could press further, the doors opened again. Torvin entered, accompanied by several members of the Royal Guard and a delegation of Viraki officials in formal attire. Your Highness, Torvin said, bowing deeply. The Sarathai delegation has arrived. Prince Sarkath demands an audience to discuss the situation. Savara straightened, royal composure sliding back into place like armor. Inform the prince I will meet with him shortly. He was most insistent. Your Highness, he claims the alliance is threatened by this development. The alliance was established by our ancestors and sanctioned by the Genetic Council, Savara replied coldly. A blood covenant supersedes arranged marriages by our most ancient laws. The prince knows this. One of the officials, A Viraki female with elaborate markings that extended from her temples to her neck stepped forward. "Your Highness, while the blood covenant is indeed sacred, this is unprecedented. The covenant has never formed with a non-Viraki before. Many in the council believe it must be a false activation." "False?" Reed asked. "Is that possible?" The official barely glanced at him. "The human should not speak in these proceedings. He has no standing until the covenant is verified." Savara's expression hardened. "The human has a name, Reed Carter, and if the covenant has chosen him, he has higher standing than anyone in this room save myself. You would do well to remember that. Counselor Zalara." The tension in the room was palpable. Reed watched as the various Viraki exchanged glances, their skin tones shifting subtly with their emotions. Darker blues indicating displeasure, lighter shades suggesting uncertainty. "There is a way to settle this," Ketvarin said, having slipped back into the chamber unnoticed. "The construct of worthiness can determine if the covenant is true." A murmur ran through the assembled Viraki. Savara's expression betrayed nothing, but Reed noticed her hands tighten at her sides. "The construct has not been activated in 7 generations, she said. "These are unprecedented circumstances." "Your Highness," Ketvarin replied. "If the human truly bears the covenant, the construct will confirm it. If not—" He left the implication hanging. Savara turned to Reed. "The construct is an ancient consciousness evaluating system. It would test whether our blood bond is genuine through a series of trials." "And if it's not?" Reed asked. "Then I would be free to proceed with the original alliance," she said. Something in her tone made Reed suspect that wasn't the full answer. "And what happens to me?" Ketvaran answered, before Savara could. "If the covenant is false, it must be purged. The process is not pleasant for the falsely bonded." "Meaning it would kill me," Reed clarified. No one contradicted him. "Your Highness," Torvin interjected. "Prince Serkath approaches. He has brought his personal guard." Savara made a quick decision. "Prepare the ceremonial chambers. Inform the prince that we will submit to the construct's judgment." She turned back to Reed. "I must deal with Serkath. Rest while you can. The dreams will continue as your mind acclimates to the genetic memories." "And if I refuse to participate in this construct business?" Reed asked. Savara's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then you condemn both of us to consequences neither of us wants." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Trust me, Reed. I didn't plan for this, but now that it's happening, it may be our only path forward." Before Reed could respond, she swept from the room, the delegation following in her wake. Only Ketvarin remained, watching Reed with those unsettling ancient eyes. "The dreams you're experiencing," the elder said quietly. "Pay attention to them. They contain knowledge you'll need." "For what?" "To survive the construct," Ketvarin replied, "and to understand why the princess's blood chose you." The dreams intensified over the next cycle of artificial day and night on Enteril. Reed found himself immersed in fragments of Viraki history, battles fought with both primitive weapons and advanced biotechnology, coronation ceremonies beneath twin moons, secret meetings of rebellion and resistance. Throughout them, all ran the consistent thread of the blood covenant, a biological imperative that seemed designed to introduce new genetic material when the royal line grew stagnant. He also dreamed of Savara, not memories this time, but her actual presence, as if her consciousness brushed against his in sleep. These encounters were strange, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical closeness. He sensed her determination, her fears, and beneath it all, a deep loneliness that mirrored his own. When he woke, she was there, sitting beside his bed. The formal regalia was gone, replaced by a simple tunic and leggings. She looked younger, without the weight of ceremony, but no less regal. "The dreams are getting stronger," she said. It wasn't a question. Reed sat up, noting with surprise that the dizziness had passed. "Your family has quite the bloody history." "All royal families do," she replied. "Power is rarely maintained without violence." "I saw you too," he admitted. "Not memories. You." Savara nodded. "The synchronization is progressing more quickly than expected." She hesitated, then added, "I saw you as well. Earth. Your childhood. The war." Reed tensed. "Stay out of my memories." "I can't control it any more than you can," she said, a hint of defensiveness entering her voice. "The bond works both ways." They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Finally, Reed asked the question that had been growing in his mind since the dreams began. "Why do I get the feeling there's more to this blood covenant than you're telling me?" Savara studied him, as if weighing how much to reveal. "What have you concluded from the dreams?" "That this isn't just about marriage," Reed said. "It's about reproduction. The covenant is designed to identify compatible genetic material to strengthen the bloodline." He paused, watching her carefully. "Which means there's a biological component beyond just memories, isn't there?" She held his gaze. "Yes. What kind of component?" Savara stood and moved to the window overlooking the sprawling architecture of Enteril. "Viraki reproduction is complex. Royal bloodlines even more so. We can reproduce conventionally, but the blood covenant enables a deeper genetic exchange." She turned back to face him. "It allows for accelerated reproduction, triggered by emotional and biological compatibility." Reed stared at her. "Accelerated how?" Savara's hand moved unconsciously to rest on her abdomen. "The exchange of genetic material has already begun through the blood contact. If the covenant is true, and if we are truly compatible." Understanding dawned. "You're saying you could get pregnant from blood contact?" "It's more complex than that. But essentially, yes. The covenant facilitates genetic transfer when it identifies optimal compatibility." Her voice was clinical, but her eyes betrayed discomfort with the subject. "It's a biological adaptation from our evolutionary past. When our species faced extinction and needed to ensure genetic diversity." Reed ran a hand over his face. "This gets better and better. So not only am I suddenly engaged to an alien princess, I might have gotten her pregnant by bleeding on me." "The process isn't instantaneous," Savara said, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. "And it's not certain. The covenant must be genuine, and our genetic structures truly compatible. The construct will determine that." A chime sounded, and Torvin's voice came through the communication system. "Your Highness, the preparations are complete. Prince Serkath awaits your presence." Savara straightened, composure settling over her like a physical transformation. "We will be there shortly." She turned to Reed. "It's time. The construct will test us both. Whatever happens in there." She paused, seeming to struggle for words. "Remember that not everything is as it appears." Reed stood, surprised again by how steady he felt. Cryptic warnings before deadly trials. Just another day in the life of a mercenary. Savara's mouth quirked in that almost smile. "You're taking this rather well for someone who was protesting vehemently just hours ago." Reed shrugged. "I've been in worse situations, usually involving more gunfire, admittedly. But I've learned to play the cards I'm dealt." He met her gaze directly. "But when this is over, assuming we survive, you and I are going to have a very honest conversation about exactly how we ended up here." Savara held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Agreed." The ceremonial chamber was vast, a perfect dome with walls of living crystal that shifted between translucence and opacity in rhythmic patterns. At the center stood a structure unlike anything Reed had ever seen. A column of what appeared to be liquid light, contained within a framework of ancient metal, inscribed with patterns matching the circuitry-like markings on the Varaki royal skin. This, Reed assumed, was the construct. A crowd had gathered to witness the proceedings: Varaki nobles, diplomatic representatives, and at the front, a tall, imposing figure who could only be Prince Serkath. Unlike Savara's understated elegance, he embraced the full spectacle of Varaki royal tradition. His ceremonial armor was adorned with what appeared to be actual living organisms that crawled and shifted across the surface, and his skin bore markings so dense they appeared to be a solid indigo mask across his features. When he turned to watch their entrance, Reed felt the weight of his hatred from across the chamber. "Princess Savara," Serkath called, his harmonized voice carrying easily in the perfect acoustics of the dome. "I see you've brought your accident." Savara didn't rise to the bait. "Prince Serkath, the Genetic Council has convened the construct of worthiness to verify the blood covenant. As is tradition, you may observe, but not interfere." "Tradition?" Serkath spat the word. "You speak of tradition while binding yourself to this human. He is not even of our star system. His genetic structure is primitive, unrefined." "The Covenant chose him," Savara replied evenly. "If you respect our traditions as much as you claim, you will honor that choice until the construct renders judgment." Reed studied the prince, recognizing the dangerous combination of entitlement and insecurity. Men like Serkath were predictable in their unpredictability, prone to lashing out when their status was threatened. Ketvarin stepped forward, raising his arms. "We gather to witness the judgment of blood and worth. The construct will determine the truth of the covenant between Princess Savara of House Varaki and the human Reed Carter." He gestured for Reed and Savara to approach the column of light. As they drew near, Reed felt a strange resonance, as if the structure was somehow aware of their presence. "The trials are threefold," Ketvarin intoned: "mind, body, and soul. Success in all three will confirm the covenant. Failure in any will nullify it." He looked at Reed with something that might have been sympathy. "For a non-Varaki to undertake the trials is unprecedented. I cannot predict what forms they will take for you." "Comforting," Reed muttered. Savara stepped closer to him. "The construct adapts to the subject. It will draw from your memories, your fears, your strengths. Traditional Varaki trials involve tests of strength and combat skill. But for you," she trailed off. "Let me guess. It's going to be something worse." "Different," she corrected. "The construct seeks truth, not just prowess. Remember that." Before Reed could respond, Ketvarin placed his hands on the framework surrounding the light column. The inscriptions began to glow, pulsing in time with a deep, resonant tone that Reed felt more than heard. "The construct awakens," Ketvarin announced. "Step forward, both of you, and place your hands in the light." Savara moved without hesitation. Reed followed more cautiously, extending his hand toward the shimmering column. The light felt simultaneously hot and cold against his skin, like plunging into icy water and fire at the same time. "The blood remembers," Ketvarin chanted. "The genes recognize. The worthiness will be tested." The light surged, engulfing both Reed and Savara entirely. Reed felt a sensation of falling, of dissolving, of being unmade and remade simultaneously. Savara's presence beside him flickered and faded. And then he was alone in darkness. The words echoed in his mind. Mind, body, soul. The trials had begun. Chapter 3. Trial of mind, flesh, and soul. Darkness gave way to light, harsh and unforgiving. Reed found himself standing in a familiar setting that sent ice through his veins, the orphanage where he'd spent his childhood on Earth. The gray walls, the narrow cots, the smell of institutional disinfectant, all perfect in their recreation. The first trial begins, came a voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't Ketvaren's voice, nor any Viraki's. It was something older, more fundamental, like the concept of speech given sound. The trial of mind tests not intelligence, but emotional cognition and rational control. A door opened at the end of the corridor. Reed knew that door. It led to the administrator's office, where punishments were dispensed and futures decided. He'd been called there the day he was told no family wanted him, that he was being transferred to the military preparatory academy, the day his childhood effectively ended. "Proceed," the voice commanded. Reed hesitated. "What am I supposed to do?" "What you must." Helpful. Reed approached the door cautiously. As he reached for the handle, he felt a surge of dread that seemed disproportionate, even to the bad memories this place evoked. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a recreation. It was a trap of some kind. He pushed the door open. Inside wasn't the administrator's office, but a vast chamber filled with translucent screens, each displaying moments from his life. His first kill during the Martian conflict, the refugee camp on Europa, where he'd failed to save a family from raiders, the face of a woman he'd once loved and left behind. Seated before these screens was a figure he recognized immediately, himself as a child, perhaps 8 years old, watching the images with blank eyes. "You failed them all," the child said, turning to face him. "Everyone you've ever cared about. Everyone who ever trusted you." Reed felt a surge of anger, then forced it down. This wasn't real. It was a construction designed to provoke an emotional response. "That's not true," he said calmly. The child's face twisted into a sneer. "Liar, you ran away. From Earth, from responsibility, from connection. You're running still, mercenary." The screens shifted to show new images, the dead Viraki guards from the assassination attempt, their bodies leaking luminescent blood, Savara wounded, her silver eyes accusing. "More deaths on your conscience," the child said. "And now you've entangled yourself in affairs beyond your understanding. You'll fail her too. It's what you do." Reed maintained his composure. "You're trying to provoke me." "I'm showing you truth," the child countered. "You know what happens to those who get close to you." The screens filled with images of death and abandonment. "Why not end it now? Save everyone the pain of your inevitable failure." A weapon materialized on the desk beside the child. Reed's own Colt Graviton. The child pushed it toward him. "One shot. End the pattern. Or continue failing everyone who ever matters to you." Reed studied the gun, then looked back at the child, at himself. He understood now. This wasn't just an emotional trigger. It was a test of judgment. The construct wanted to see if he would react with violence, even self-violence when provoked. Instead of picking up the weapon or arguing further, Reed simply sat down on the floor, cross-legged. "No," he said quietly. The child's expression darkened. "No? You refuse to acknowledge your failures?" "I've failed people," Reed agreed. "I've made mistakes. But this..." He gestured at the screens. The weapon, the child itself, "isn't about truth. It's about manipulation. And I'm not playing." "You cannot ignore your past," the child hissed, its form flickering slightly. "I'm not ignoring anything. I'm refusing to let you weaponize it against me." Reed closed his eyes. "My memories are mine. My choices are mine. You have no power to define either." He felt, rather than saw, the child's form destabilize, the screens wavering around them. The construct was losing its grip on the scenario because he refused to engage with its parameters. "The trial is not complete," the child insisted. but its voice had lost the otherworldly resonance, becoming small and uncertain. "Yes, it is," Reed said, keeping his eyes closed and his posture relaxed. "The trial ends when I choose not to participate in it." For a moment, there was silence. Then the voice of the construct returned, no longer coming from the child, but from the air itself. "Unexpected approach, resistance through non-engagement. The trial of mind is concluded." The room dissolved around Reed, the orphanage fading like mist. He opened his eyes to find himself in an empty white space, formless and infinite. "The second trial awaits," the construct announced. "The trial of body tests not strength, but control and discipline of physical form." The whiteness rippled and reformed into a vast labyrinth of gleaming metal. Reed stood at its entrance, the walls reflecting his image in distorted fragments. Unlike the emotional manipulation of the first trial, this one seemed straightforward: navigate the maze. As Reed took his first step into the labyrinth, he felt a strange sensation, as if his nervous system was being mapped by some external force. The metal walls pulsed with energy that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. "The labyrinth responds to neural impulses," the construct explained. "Your thoughts, your fear, your tension, all trigger its defenses. Calm passage grants safe journey. Agitation brings peril." Great. A maze that could read his mind and would try to kill him if he got anxious. Perfect for someone about to undergo a potentially lethal alien trial. Reed took a deep breath and began walking. The first junction presented 3 identical corridors. As he considered which to take, he felt the floor beneath him tremble slightly. Looking down, he saw the metal beginning to liquefy where he stood, responding to his momentary indecision. Instinctively, he jumped to solid ground, heart rate spiking, which caused the walls of his chosen corridor to sprout razor-sharp protrusions that began closing in from both sides. Reed forced himself to stop. Running would only trigger worse traps. Instead, he closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, drawing on techniques he'd learned during specialized training for high-stress combat situations. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8, repeat. His pulse slowed. When he opened his eyes, the metal spikes had retracted, and the floor had re-solidified. This wasn't a traditional maze. It was a test of his ability to control his physiological responses under pressure. The exit wouldn't be found through clever navigation, but through complete mastery of his own nervous system. Reed sat down in the middle of the corridor and began to meditate. It was the last thing anyone would expect from a mercenary, to meet a physical challenge with absolute stillness. But Reed had survived enough combat situations to know that panic was the true enemy. He deepened his breathing, focusing his attention on the sensation of air entering and leaving his lungs, the beat of his heart gradually slowing to a steady, calm rhythm. As his vital signs stabilized, he noticed the labyrinth responding, the walls softening, becoming translucent. Through them, he could now see the true structure of the maze, including the direct path to the center. Reed remained seated, continuing his meditation. Moving would mean engaging with the labyrinth's rules. The true test wasn't finding the exit. It was transcending the need to search for it. Time passed. Minutes or hours. He couldn't tell. Finally, the voice of the construct spoke again. "Fascinating. The trial of body is traditionally overcome through agility and endurance. You chose inaction over action, stillness over movement." There was a note of what might have been respect in the ancient voice. "The approach is valid. The trial of body is concluded." The labyrinth dissolved around Reed, returning him to the featureless white void. "The final trial approaches," the construct announced. "The trial of soul tests not belief, but truth and choice." The whiteness twisted and reformed, but this time into something unexpected, the bridge of a starship. Through the viewports, Reed could see the vast expanse of space, a nebula of breathtaking beauty swirling in the distance. The ship's controls were advanced but recognizable, designed for human operation. And standing before him was Savara, but not the Savara he knew. This version wore no royal insignia, no formal attire or combat suit. She was dressed in simple, human-style clothing, her demeanor softer, more open. Her silver eyes watched him with unmistakable affection. "Welcome home," she said, her voice missing the harmonic quality of Viraki speech. "We've been waiting for you." From behind her stepped a child, perhaps 5 years old, with features that combined human and Viraki characteristics in a striking blend. The child smiled at Reed with innocent joy. "Father!" the child exclaimed, running forward to embrace him. Reed stood frozen, understanding dawning. This wasn't a challenge to overcome. It was a vision, a possible future. "What is this?" he asked, looking past the child to the Savara doppelganger. She approached him, reaching out to touch his face with gentle fingers. "This is peace, Reed. This is what could be. No more fighting, no more running. A family, a purpose." She gestured around them. "This ship can take us beyond Viraki space, beyond coalition territory. We could explore the unexplored, just the three of us." The child tugged at his hand. "You promised to teach me to navigate today, Father." It was a perfect fantasy. Escape from the political entanglements, from the responsibilities neither of them had chosen. A life of freedom among the stars, with a family of his own. Something Reed had never allowed himself to even imagine. "All you need to do is choose this path," the Savara copy said, as if reading his thoughts. "Reject the real world with its complications and politics. Stay here with us. The construct can make this reality permanent for you." Reed looked down at the child's hopeful face, then back at the woman who resembled Savara, but lacked her essential nature. The steel beneath the surface, the weight of responsibility that defined her. "This isn't real," he said quietly. "It could be," she insisted. "That's the point of this trial. You can have this perfect life, this perfect version of her, who loves you unconditionally, who asks nothing of you but your presence." Reed stepped back, gently disengaging from the child's grip. "That's why it's not real. Savara isn't perfect. She's complicated, burdened, possibly manipulative." He looked around at the idyllic scene. "Life isn't about escaping complications. It's about facing them." "Why choose struggle when you could have peace?" the copy asked, her expression puzzled. "Why choose a woman who may be using you when you could have one who loves you completely?" Reed considered the question seriously. Why indeed? The real Savara had entangled him in Viraki politics against his will. She might be pregnant with his child through a biological process he barely understood. She had secrets she wasn't sharing. And yet, "Because she's real," he said finally. "She has her own agenda, her own wounds, her own history. She's fighting for something she believes in, even if her methods are questionable." He looked directly at the copy. "I don't need a perfect partner. I need someone who's willing to fight alongside me in the real world, however messy that might be." The copy's expression shifted to something like sadness. "Even knowing she may have manipulated events to create this bond between you." "Even then," Reed confirmed. "At least that shows initiative and courage. More than I can say for this fantasy." The ship, the child, and the Savara copy began to dissolve around him, returning to the white void. But before they disappeared completely, the copy smiled. A genuine smile that for a moment looked exactly like the real Savara might, if she ever truly let her guard down. "Wise choice," she said, in the voice of the construct. "The trial of soul is concluded. The whiteness expanded, then contracted, and Reed found himself back in the ceremonial chamber, the column of light receding back into its containment framework. Savara stood beside him, looking slightly disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. The assembled crowd was murmuring in shock and speculation. Ketvarin approached, his expression one of barely concealed amazement. "It is unprecedented," the elder announced to the gathering. "The human has completed all 3 trials through methods never before witnessed in the history of the construct." He turned to Reed. "You chose stillness over action, acceptance over denial, reality over perfection. Truly, the Blood Covenant has chosen wisely." Prince Serkath pushed forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. He cannot have passed the trials legitimately. A human could not possibly." "The construct has judged," Ketvarin interrupted firmly. "Its decision is beyond question, even from you, Prince Serkath. The blood covenant between Princess Savara and Reed Carter is verified as genuine." The pronouncement sent a wave of reaction through the crowd. Shock, disapproval, curiosity. Reed ignored them all, turning to Savara. "Did you experience the same trials?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "The construct adapts to each individual. My trials were different." For a moment, her composure slipped, revealing exhaustion and something that might have been relief, but equally challenging in their own way. Serkath was still protesting, his personal guard moving closer in a manner that seemed more threatening than protective. "This changes nothing. The alliance between our houses was established by our ancestors. One human cannot overturn generations of tradition." Ketvarin's voice cut through the growing tension. "By the oldest laws of our people, the blood covenant supersedes all other arrangements. It is the will of our ancestors, encoded in our very genetics." He turned to address the crowd. "The covenant has chosen. The alliance will proceed. But with Reed Carter standing as Princess Savara's consort." Savara placed a hand on Reed's arm, the first time she had touched him voluntarily outside of necessity. "We should withdraw. There is much to discuss, and this forum is not appropriate." Reed nodded, suddenly aware of the toll the trials had taken. His mind felt stretched, his body drained despite having engaged in no physical exertion. As they moved to leave, Serkath stepped into their path. "This is not over," he hissed, close enough that only they could hear. "The old ways will not be discarded so easily. Your human will not survive to see the coronation." Savara's expression hardened. "Threats against my chosen consort are treason. Prince Serkath, tread carefully." She led Reed from the chamber, flanked by her royal guards. As they walked, Reed noticed she was moving with unusual stiffness, one hand occasionally drifting to rest on her abdomen. "Are you all right?" he asked, once they were alone in a private transport vessel. Savara hesitated before answering. "The trials were taxing, and there have been additional developments." She met his gaze directly. "The blood covenant appears to have fully activated. I am with child." Reed stared at her. Despite the earlier warnings, the reality of it was still shocking. "That's fast." "As I explained, the process is accelerated. Once genetic compatibility is confirmed, as it has been by the construct, cellular integration proceeds rapidly." Her clinical tone couldn't quite mask the undercurrent of emotion. "I had not expected it to progress so quickly." Reed sat back, trying to process this new development. "So I passed your alien compatibility test, and now you're pregnant. With my child. Through blood contact." He ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane." "By human standards, perhaps," Savara acknowledged. "But it is a sacred process among my people. The child will carry both our genetic heritage, a living embodiment of the alliance between our worlds." Reed studied her face. Despite her composed exterior, He could sense her uncertainty, perhaps even fear, not of him, but of the situation they found themselves in. "You promised me the truth when this was over," he reminded her. "I think we're past the point of diplomatic evasions, don't you?" Savara was silent for a long moment, her silver eyes looking past him at something only she could see. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its royal formality. "Yes," she said simply. "The time for truth has come." Chapter 4. The Lie Beneath the Crown. The royal chambers on Enteril were a curious blend of ancient tradition and advanced technology. Living walls embedded with neural interfaces, furniture that responded to the occupants' biometrics, ceremonial artifacts displayed alongside quantum communication devices. It reflected the Viraki themselves, a species with one foot in mystical tradition and the other in scientific innovation. Savara dismissed her attendants with a firm command that they not be disturbed. When the doors sealed behind them, she activated a privacy field that enveloped the room in a subtle shimmer, protection against both physical and electronic surveillance. She removed her formal outer robe, seeming smaller without it, though no less regal. For the first time, Reed noticed how young she actually was, probably equivalent to an early 30s human, though Viraki aging was different enough to make exact comparisons difficult. "Where would you like me to begin?" she asked, pouring 2 glasses of a pale blue liquid from a crystal decanter. Reed accepted the offered drink but didn't immediately consume it. "How about we start with whether you engineered this whole situation? The attack, the blood contact, all of it." Savara didn't flinch at the directness of the question. "I did not orchestrate the assassination attempt. The deaths of my guards were real, as was the danger to myself." She took a small sip of her drink. "However, I was prepared for the possibility that the blood covenant might activate under certain circumstances." "Meaning?" She set down her glass and faced him squarely. "Meaning that while I did not create the situation, I ensured that if such a situation arose, it might work to my advantage." "By ensuring, you mean what exactly?" Savara hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "From childhood, I have been subjected to genetic modification, ostensibly to strengthen the royal lineage and enhance desirable traits. It is standard practice among Viraki nobility." She began to pace slowly. "What no one knew is that I secretly altered some of these procedures." Reed raised an eyebrow. "You hacked your own genetic modifications? How?" "I have always had an aptitude for biochemistry," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "And I had help, a trusted mentor who recognized the problematic nature of the arrangement with Serkath's house long before I did." "Ketvarin," she nodded. "He taught me to access the genetic sequencing equipment under the guise of traditional study. Over years, I made subtle adjustments to my own bloodline markers, specifically to the triggers that activate the blood covenant." Understanding dawned. "You reprogrammed yourself to be compatible with non-Viraki." "More precisely, I expanded the range of genetic profiles that could activate the covenant. I couldn't target you specifically. I didn't know you existed, but I created the possibility that someone outside the traditional Viraki genetic pool might trigger the bond." Reed considered this. "So when my skin absorbed your blood, the modified markers in my bloodline recognized compatible aspects in your genetic structure that would have been ignored in a traditional Viraki royal." She returned to her seat. "The bond is real, Reed. The construct confirmed that. But the criteria for that bond were adjusted." "You rigged the game," Reed summarized. "Why? Just to avoid marrying Serkath?" Savara's expression hardened. "Serkath represents everything dangerous about Viraki tradition. He believes in genetic purity, in the supremacy of our species over all others in the galaxy. Under his influence, the Alliance would have become a tool for oppression and eventual conquest." She leaned forward. I altered one aspect of my biology to prevent giving such a man control over both our houses and the considerable military forces they command. Reed had to admit, put that way, it sounded like a reasonable precaution. So you created a biological escape hatch. But why me? There must have been dozens of non-Viraki you've had contact with over the years. Hundreds, she confirmed. But the blood covenant isn't triggered by mere contact. It requires specific conditions, genuine risk, emotional resonance, mutual respect. She studied him thoughtfully. Something in you was compatible not just genetically, but essentially. You matched criteria I built into the modifications, without even realizing I was doing so. What criteria? Savara's silver eyes held his. Independence, resilience, and most importantly, a complete lack of desire for power. Her voice softened slightly. I chose you because you didn't want me or my position. In an empire where men scheme and fight for titles and authority, the only one worthy of trust is the one who would refuse the crown if offered. Reed wasn't sure whether to be flattered or offended. So you used me as an escape route from a political marriage. I created a possibility, she corrected. The rest, including your performance in the trials, was entirely your own doing. She paused. And now we face consequences neither of us fully anticipated. She placed a hand on her abdomen, the gesture more protective than demonstrative. Reed found himself staring at it, trying to comprehend the reality that his genetic material was already combining with hers to create a new life, a hybrid of human and Viraki that had never existed before. The child changes everything, Savara continued. The alliance must still proceed, but its nature will be fundamentally altered. Instead of uniting houses through a traditional marriage, it will be cemented through a new bloodline, one that bridges our species and introduces unprecedented genetic diversity into the royal lineage. And Surkath just has to accept this? Reed asked skeptically. No, she admitted. He does not, which is why we are in considerable danger. The trial has verified our bond, but Surkath has powerful allies both within my house and his own. There will be resistance, possibly violent. Reed rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. So, to summarize, you genetically modified yourself to escape a political marriage, accidentally bonded with me instead, got pregnant at light speed, and now we're targets for assassination by a rejected alien prince and his traditionalist supporters. He gave a short, humorless laugh. And I thought mercenary work was complicated. I understand your frustration, Savara said, her tone carefully neutral. You did not ask for any of this. If you wish to leave, arrangements can be made for your safe passage back to Coalition space. The bond cannot be broken, but you need not participate in what comes next. Reed studied her, seeing past the composed exterior to the tension beneath. She was offering him an exit, but he suspected it would cost her dearly if he took it. And what happens to you and the child if I walk away? Savara's expression remained carefully controlled. I would be in a precarious political position, but not an untenable one. The child would be raised as royal Viraki, with all the privileges and burdens that entails. Under threat from Surkath and his allies? Yes, she acknowledged. But that would be true whether you stayed or left. Reed stood and walked to the window, looking out at the alien cityscape of Interil. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting dual shadows across the architectural marvel of the diplomatic sector. Below, representatives of 100 different species conducted the business of galactic politics, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding in the royal chambers. He thought about the trials he'd endured, especially the final one. The perfect fantasy life he'd been offered and rejected. The real Savara was far from perfect. She was calculating, secretive, and had manipulated him into this situation, however indirectly. And yet, there was something compelling about her determination, her willingness to literally rewrite her own biology, to fight against a future she saw as destructive. Reed turned back to face her. "I'm not leaving." Surprise flickered across Savara's features before she masked it. "You understand what staying means. You would become my consort in truth, entangled in Viraki politics and traditions you barely understand. Your life would never be entirely your own again." "I understand," Reed said. "But I've spent my whole life running from commitment, from responsibility, from anything that might tie me down. Maybe it's time to stand and fight for something instead." Savara studied him, seeming to search for something in his expression. "This isn't about obligation to the child." "Partly," Reed admitted. "But not entirely. You're fighting to change a system you see as flawed. I respect that. And after what I saw in the construct..." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "The trials showed me something important, that sometimes the hardest but right choice is to engage with messy reality instead of running from it." For the first time, Savara smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "The Covenant chose better than I could have anticipated." Reed wasn't quite ready to return the sentiment. "Don't get me wrong. I'm still not thrilled about how we got here. But we are here, and walking away won't uncomplicate my life at this point." "A pragmatic approach," she observed. "I'm a pragmatic guy." He took a breath. "So what happens next?" Savara rose, her royal bearing returning like a mantle settling on her shoulders. "Next, we rewrite the terms of the alliance. Not as subordinate and dominant houses, but as equal partners bringing different strengths to the table." She met his gaze directly. "And we prepare for Surkath's inevitable counterattack." "You think he'll move against us directly?" "Eventually. First, he'll try political maneuvering, challenging the validity of the bond despite the construct's judgment, appealing to traditionalists who are horrified by the idea of human genetics in the royal bloodline." She began activating various data displays around the room, bringing up strategic information. "We need allies. Your performance in the trials has already created interest among the more progressive factions, but we'll need broader support." Reed watched her slip effortlessly into strategic planning mode. "You've been thinking about this for a long time." "Since I was old enough to understand what my arranged marriage would mean," she confirmed. "But I never anticipated this specific outcome." She glanced at him. "Or you." Before Reed could respond, the privacy field shimmered with an alert. Torvin's voice came through the communication system. "Your Highness, urgent news. Prince Surkath has called for an emergency session of the Genetic Council. He claims to have evidence that the Blood Covenant was artificially manipulated." Savara's expression tightened. "So it begins sooner than anticipated." She activated the communication link. "Inform the Council I will attend, and Torvin. Prepare security for highest threat level." "Already done, Your Highness." She turned back to Reed. "It seems Surkath has discovered or suspects my genetic alterations. This complicates matters significantly." Reed considered the implications. "He'll use it to invalidate the bond. Claim you cheated your way out of the arrangement." "Precisely. And many traditionalists will support him, regardless of the construct's judgment." She began changing into more formal attire, her movements efficient and practiced. "The construct verified the bond as genuine, but that may not matter if enough council members believe it was reached through deception." "So we face them head-on," Reed said. "Tell the truth on our terms before Surkath can use it against us." Savara paused, looking at him with surprise. "That's not the traditional Viraki approach to such challenges." "Maybe that's exactly why it might work," Reed suggested. "You modified your genetics to create new possibilities. Why not modify your political strategy the same way?" She considered this, then nodded slowly. A bold approach. It has merit. She finished fastening her ceremonial armor, more practical than ornamental. Reed noted, "But it comes with significant risk. Admitting to genetic self-modification is unprecedented. It could be seen as treason against the royal bloodline itself." Or, Reed countered, it could be framed as the ultimate expression of the royal prerogative, taking direct control of your genetic destiny, rather than submitting to traditions that no longer serve your people. Savara studied him with new appreciation. "You understand political framing better than you let on. Mercenary." Reed shrugged. "You don't survive as long as I have in conflict zones without understanding how power works. The story matters as much as the facts, sometimes more." "Indeed." She completed her preparations, then faced him fully. "If we take this approach, you must stand with me before the council, as equals. Are you prepared for that?" Reed thought about the life he'd left behind, the drifting from job to job, planet to planet, never belonging anywhere or to anyone. It had been a kind of freedom, but an empty one. This, however complicated and dangerous, offered something different: purpose, connection, a fight worth having. "I'm ready," he said. "Let's rewrite the story." Chapter 5. Not by blood, but by choice. The Genetic Council chamber was an architectural marvel that embodied Viraki values in physical form. Its circular design represented the continuity of bloodlines, while the spiraling ramps connecting different levels symbolized the helical structure of DNA itself. The walls were embedded with preserved genetic samples from every significant Viraki lineage going back millennia. Literal history written in biological code. Reed and Savara approached the central platform together, ignoring the murmurs that rippled through the assembled dignitaries. Prince Serkath already stood before the council, his posture radiating righteous indignation. Beside him was a Viraki scientist Reed hadn't seen before, clutching data devices and looking nervous. The head counselor, an ancient Viraki with skin so pale it was nearly white, raised a hand for silence. "This emergency session has been called at the request of Prince Serkath of House Sarathai. The matter concerns the blood covenant between Princess Savara and the human Reed Carter, which was verified by the construct of worthiness, but is now challenged on grounds of genetic manipulation." Serkath stepped forward. "Honored counselors, I present irrefutable evidence that Princess Savara has committed the gravest heresy against our traditions. She has deliberately altered her own royal bloodline markers to escape her sacred duty to our houses." He gestured to the scientist beside him. "The royal genetic archives show unauthorized access and modifications spanning several years. The blood covenant with this human is not a miracle of compatibility, but a calculated deception." The council chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Genetic self-modification by royalty was unheard of, a fundamental violation of Viraki belief in the sanctity of bloodlines. The head counselor raised his hand again. "Princess Savara, how do you respond to these allegations?" Reed felt Savara tense beside him, then relax into a calm resolve. They had discussed their strategy, but the final approach would be hers to determine. He stood ready to support whatever direction she chose. "The allegations are true," Savara said, her clear voice carrying throughout the chamber. The admission sent another wave of shock through the assembly. Even Serkath seemed taken aback by her directness. "I modified my own genetic structure," she continued, "not to escape duty, but to fulfill a higher responsibility to my people and to the galaxy we share with countless other sentient species." She stepped forward, commanding the attention of everyone present. "For generations, we have treated our genetics as sacred and unchangeable, a divine inheritance to be preserved at all costs. Yet we selectively breed our royal lines, enhance desirable traits, and eliminate perceived weaknesses. We already practice genetic manipulation, but we dress it in tradition and ceremony to make it palatable. Reed watched the council members' reactions carefully. Some were clearly offended, others thoughtful, a few even nodding slightly. What I did was take direct control of my own biological destiny, Savara continued. I expanded the criteria for the blood covenant to include compatible beings beyond our narrow definition of acceptable Viraki bloodlines. I did this knowing the alliance with House Sarathai was leading us toward genetic isolation and, eventually, stagnation. Sirkath interrupted, his harmonized voice harsh with anger. She admits to heresy. This invalidates the covenant and all that has followed from it. The original alliance must be reinstated immediately. The head counselor tilted his head. Is this true, Princess? Did you specifically modify your genetics to avoid the arranged marriage? Savara met his gaze without flinching. I modified my genetics to create the possibility of a different future for our people. One based on compatibility and shared values rather than ancient arrangements made by ancestors who could not foresee the challenges we now face. She gestured to Reed. The blood covenant chose Reed Carter not because I engineered it to choose him specifically, but because he embodies qualities our bloodline needs: adaptability, independence of thought, and a perspective beyond our traditional boundaries. Convenient justifications for treason, Sirkath spat. The human has no place in our royal succession. The child she carries is an abomination that will dilute our sacred bloodline. Reed had maintained his silence until now, respecting that this was primarily Savara's battle to fight. But at the mention of the child, he stepped forward. With respect, Prince Sirkath, that abomination carries my genetic material too, he said, his voice level but firm. Where I come from, people who threaten children, born or unborn, aren't considered fit to lead anything. A murmur of approval came from several council members. Reed continued, addressing the entire assembly. I didn't ask to be part of your political struggles. I was hired to do a job and got pulled into something much bigger. But now that I'm here, I've seen enough to know that your traditions are at a crossroads. He glanced at Savara. The princess had the courage to recognize that evolution, controlled, intentional change, is sometimes necessary for survival. That's not heresy. It's wisdom. The head counselor leaned forward. You speak boldly for an outsider, human. What gives you the right to lecture us on our traditions? The construct gave me that right, Reed replied. It tested me and found me worthy, despite, or perhaps because of, my differences from you. If your most sacred judgment system can recognize the value in diversity, perhaps your council should consider doing the same. Ketfaren, who had been observing silently, now stepped forward. If I may address the council, as first keeper of royal lineage, I have studied our genetic history more thoroughly than perhaps anyone living. The head counselor nodded permission. Our records show that the Viraki nearly faced extinction twice in our early history, Ketvarin said. Each time, we were saved by genetic diversity, introduced through unexpected means. The blood covenant itself evolved as a biological mechanism to identify compatible genetic material from outside established bloodlines when stagnation threatened our survival. He gestured to Reed and Savara. What the princess has done is not counter to our deepest traditions, but in perfect alignment with their original purpose, ensuring the adaptability and survival of our species. Sirkath was visibly fuming. This is revisionist nonsense. Our bloodlines have remained pure for thousands of years. We do not need human contamination to survive. Pure, yes, Ketvarin agreed. And increasingly prone to genetic disorders, declining fertility, and physiological weaknesses. The data is clear for those willing to see it. The council members began consulting among themselves, their skin tones shifting through shades of blue that reflected their emotional states. Reed leaned closer to Savara. They're actually considering it, he murmured. Ketvaren's support is significant, she replied quietly. He is revered for his knowledge of our genetic history. The head counselor raised his hand once more. We have heard enough to recognize that this matter requires deeper consideration than an emergency session allows. However, certain immediate decisions must be made. He fixed his ancient eyes on Savara. Princess, while your methods are unprecedented and troubling, the construct's judgment cannot be overruled. The blood covenant with Reed Carter stands as valid. Sir Cath began to protest, but the counselor silenced him with a gesture. However, he continued, the council cannot ignore that you deliberately modified your royal genetics without authorization. Such actions cannot go unaddressed. He paused, considering. Therefore, we propose a conditional resolution. The alliance between houses will proceed, with Reed Carter recognized as your consort, but under terms that must be negotiated anew. Both houses will have equal representation in these negotiations. Savara inclined her head. The terms of my proposal are simple. First, the alliance will be based on mutual cooperation, not subordination of either house. Second, the child will be recognized as legitimate heir to both lineages, but will not be used as a political pawn. Third, I will lead my house with Reed as my equal partner, not as a figurehead or subordinate. The boldness of her demands caused another stir among the council. Such terms would fundamentally reshape the power dynamics between the great houses of the Viraki. The head counselor looked to Sir Cath. Prince, your response? Sir Cath's face was a mask of barely contained rage. I reject these terms completely. The princess has violated our most sacred traditions, and now seeks to compound her heresy by elevating a human to royal status. This is unacceptable. Perhaps, came a new voice from the gallery, but it may also be necessary. An elder Viraki female stepped forward, one Reed recognized as Counselor Zalara, who had earlier been skeptical of his legitimacy. She addressed the assembly with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. The alliance between our houses was meant to strengthen both, to end conflict and create stability. If these new terms would better accomplish those goals in our current reality, then tradition must adapt. She turned to Sir Cath. Your Highness, I served your grandmother and have watched you grow from a child. Your devotion to our ways is commendable, but rigidity in the face of necessary change is not strength. It is fragility. Sir Cath's expression darkened further. But something in Zalara's words seemed to reach the other council members. Several nodded in agreement. The head counselor surveyed the room. The council will take time to consider all aspects of this unprecedented situation. In the interim, we recognize the blood covenant as valid and acknowledge Reed Carter as the princess's chosen consort. The terms of the alliance will be renegotiated with input from all concerned parties. He fixed Sir Cath with a stern gaze. Any action taken against the princess, her consort, or their unborn child before negotiations conclude will be considered an act of treason against the genetic continuity of our people. Is this understood? Sir Cath gave a stiff nod, though his expression promised this was far from over. The session concluded, and Reed and Savara were escorted from the chamber by royal guards. Once they were alone in a private transport vessel, Savara allowed herself a small smile. That went better than anticipated, she said. Did it? Reed asked. Sir Cath looked ready to commit murder right there in the council chamber. He was, she agreed. But he can't act openly now, not with the council's warning. And we've gained something precious, time to build alliances and prepare. She studied him thoughtfully. You spoke well. The council was impressed. Reed shrugged. I just told the truth as I see it. Sometimes, that is the most radical act possible. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for standing with me. You could have denounced my methods, claimed I manipulated you. It would have been true, in part. In part, Reed agreed. But the construct showed me something important. That sometimes the truth is more complex than simple manipulation or victimhood. You created a possibility. Fate or biology or whatever you want to call it did the rest. He looked out at the passing cityscape. Besides, Surkath is exactly the kind of leader who'd start a war just to prove he could win it. The galaxy doesn't need another warlord with a god complex. Savara studied his profile. You understand more than you let on. Occupational hazard. You see enough conflicts from the inside. You start recognizing the patterns. He turned back to her. So what now? We negotiate terms with a man who wants us both dead? We negotiate, yes, but from a position of growing strength. Savara activated a holographic display showing political alignments among various Varaki factions. Ketvaran and Zelara's support was significant. Others will follow, and there are many, even among the traditionalists, who fear Surkath's militaristic ambitions. Reed examined the display. You've been planning this for a long time. Planning for change, yes. This specific outcome, she shook her head. This I could not have foreseen. Her hand drifted to her abdomen again, the gesture becoming familiar. The child changes everything. A new bloodline. Neither fully Varaki nor human, but something unprecedented. You keep saying that like it's a good thing, Reed observed. Most species are pretty protective of their genetic heritage. Most species stagnate and die, Savara countered. The greatest civilizations in galactic history are those that embrace change rather than fearing it. She deactivated the display. But these are discussions for tomorrow. Tonight, we should rest. The coming days will require all our strength. When they arrived at the royal residence, a message was waiting. A formal communication from the Genetic Council confirming their interim decision and establishing a timetable for alliance negotiations. Included was an addendum. The Council had appointed a medical team specialized in interspecies genetics to monitor Savara's pregnancy, the first of its kind in recorded history. As Savara reviewed the message, Reed stood at the window, watching the twin moons of Entoril rise fully in the night sky. So much had changed in such a short time. Days ago, he had been a mercenary with no ties, no commitments, no future beyond the next contract. Now, he was bonded to a Varaki princess, expectant father to an unprecedented hybrid child, and central figure in an interstellar political drama. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt a strange calm, the same stillness that had helped him navigate the construct's labyrinth. For the first time in years, perhaps in his entire adult life, he wasn't running from something or toward something else. He was simply present, engaged with the reality before him, however complex and dangerous it might be. Savara joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could feel the subtle heat of her body without quite touching. Second thoughts? She asked quietly. Reed considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. Strange as it sounds, this feels right, not easy. Not safe, but right. She nodded, understanding in her silver eyes. I felt the same when the blood covenant activated. Not relief at escaping Surkath, but recognition, as if something long prepared for had finally aligned. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the moons cast their dual shadows across the city. Then, Savara turned to face him directly. There is something I should tell you, she said, her voice taking on a formal quality. About the child. Reed tensed slightly. What about it? Varaki gestation is accelerated compared to human pregnancy. The child will develop rapidly, especially given the unique circumstances of the blood covenant. She hesitated. We have perhaps 3 standard months before birth, not 9 as humans experience. 3 months, Reed repeated. That's soon. Yes. And in that time, we must secure our position, finalize the alliance terms, and prepare for the child's arrival. She studied his face. It is much to ask of someone who never sought this role. Reed thought of the orphanage where he'd grown up, of the emptiness he'd carried his entire life, the absence of family, of belonging, of purpose beyond survival. Then he thought of the vision the construct had shown him, the perfect fantasy of escape with a sanitized version of Savara and a half-Iraqi child. He had rejected the fantasy, not because he didn't want a family, but because he wanted a real one, complications, dangers, and all. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. Something shifted in Savara's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of her perpetual guard. She reached out, taking his hand in hers for the first time without practical necessity. Her skin was cooler than human temperature, smooth, with a subtle texture like fine suede. "Then we face what comes together," she said. "Not because blood or tradition demands it, but by choice." "By choice," Reed agreed, curling his fingers around hers. "That seems like something worth fighting for." 3 months later, Reed stood on the balcony of the royal residence, holding his newborn daughter. The child had Savara's silver eyes, but Reed's darker complexion. Her skin, a fascinating mosaic of human coloring, with subtle Iraqi patterns, emerging as faint iridescence when the light struck it just right. The medical team had been amazed at how perfectly the human and Iraqi genetic structures had integrated, as if the two species, for all their apparent differences, had been compatible all along, just waiting for the right catalyst. Behind him, Savara was meeting with representatives from both houses, finalizing the terms of the new alliance. The negotiations had been tense, with Sir Kath fighting every concession. But the tide of opinion had shifted decisively since the Council's initial ruling. The birth of a healthy hybrid child, something many had deemed impossible, had been seen as an auspicious sign by much of Iraqi society. Ancient prophecies were being reinterpreted, traditional texts examined for precedents, biological theories revised. The child stirred in Reed's arms, making a soft sound somewhere between a human baby's coo and the harmonic resonance of Iraqi speech. He adjusted his hold, still marveling at how natural it felt to cradle this impossibility, this miracle of biology and circumstance and choice. Savara joined him on the balcony, her step light despite having given birth just days earlier. Iraqi recovered quickly, another evolutionary advantage Reed was thoroughly grateful for. "The final terms are agreed," she said, her voice containing a note of satisfaction he had rarely heard before. "Equal partnership between houses, mutual defense pact, open trade, and cultural exchange programs." She stroked the child's cheek with a gentle finger. "And most importantly, recognition of our daughter as legitimate heir to both lineages, to be raised according to her unique heritage, rather than forced into traditional Iraqi molds." Reed smiled. Sir Kath must have loved that part. "He was displeased," Savara acknowledged, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But with both Ketvarin and Zilara supporting our position, along with growing public sentiment, he had little choice but to concede." "He'll try again," Reed warned. "Men like him don't give up power easily." "Of course he will," Savara agreed. "And we will be ready." She looked down at their daughter. "What shall we call her? She should have a name that honors both her heritages." Reed considered. His family history was a blank, his origins lost in the bureaucratic maze of Earth's orphanage system. He had nothing to pass on but himself. "She'll be the first of her kind," he said finally. "Maybe her name should reflect that. Something new, not tied to either of our pasts." Savara nodded thoughtfully. "Among my people, there is a concept called Navarin, The moment when something unprecedented emerges from the convergence of separate paths. It has no direct translation in your language, but it conveys the idea of beautiful inevitability, of patterns aligning to create something that could not have been predicted, but feels, in retrospect, as if it was always meant to be. Navarin, Reed repeated, testing the sound. The child opened her silver eyes at the word, as if recognizing something in its harmonic tones. I think she approves, Savara smiled, a full, genuine expression that transformed her face. In the months since the blood covenant had activated, these moments had become more frequent, the rigid royal mask slipping to reveal the woman beneath. Reed had discovered he enjoyed cataloging these glimpses, treasuring each one as a victory of intimacy over protocol. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sons of Enteril begin their descent toward the horizon. The diplomatic summit that had brought them together was long concluded, but they remained on the neutral world as their unprecedented alliance took shape. Soon, they would return to Viraki space to formalize Reed's position and present Navarin to the broader population. Are you ready for that? Savara asked, seemingly reading his thoughts as she had increasingly been able to do, another unexpected side effect of their bond. Life among my people will be challenging for you. Reed looked down at his daughter, then at the woman beside him, this complicated, brilliant, determined princess who had literally rewritten her own biology to change her fate. He thought of the long, solitary years before their paths had crossed, and the unexpected fullness that had replaced that emptiness. I'm not worried, he said. We've already done the impossible. Everything else is just details. Savara's expression softened further. When my blood first touched your skin, I told you not to panic. I wonder, did you ever imagine we would end up here? Reed laughed softly. Not even close. But here's what I've learned. The best futures aren't the ones we plan for, or the ones forced on us by tradition. They're the ones we choose, moment by moment, even when, especially when, they're difficult. The child, Navarin, made another sound, this one distinctly cheerful. Savara reached out, and Reed transferred their daughter to her arms. As he watched them together, he felt a certainty that had nothing to do with alien blood bonds or genetic compatibility, and everything to do with the choices that had brought them to this moment. Not by blood, but by choice. It was, Reed decided, a philosophy worth building a life around, and perhaps even a legacy.